Welcome to the mall. I recently got an email from a publisher about an upcoming game by the name of BONEREADER, and I was offered a review copy to check out the game. I said yes, and so I'm here with a quick little first impressions / review of the game. For the sake of disclosure, while I did get my copy for free, I am under no guidance or restrictions from the developer or the publisher. The only limitation was a standard embargo that kept this video from going live until today. As far as I can tell, I'm under no pressure to sugarcoat anything or spin things favorably. All my thoughts here are going to be my own, and this will be from my own perspective. I played the game for about 4 hours, and while I only got partway through the story mode, I did also check out the casino mode. I think I got enough of an impression from the game to offer some substantive feedback. BONEREADER is a deck builder roguelike game based around rolling dice. The game puts you in the shoes of Harlan Hill, a mercenary and criminal who was executed. Your past is vague and will be uncovered throughout the story. When you wake up in the land of the dead, you first encounter the old man, who gives you an interesting offer. If you can win at a game of dice and cards, you can rebuild your soul and return to the world of the living. And so begins the story. BONEREADER has a very interesting visual style. The game is entirely in 2D, with a pixel art style possibly influenced by early to mid-90s PC games. The synopsis of the game describes the afterlife as a surreal, mescaline dreamscape. A purgatory shaped by memory, guilt, and judgment. The developer, confusingly named BONEREADERS, has done this sort of pixel art style in their 2 previous games. The level of detail and shading for the art reminds me of several games. A few that come to mind are Raptor, Call of the Shadows, and some old point-and-click games. Unlike those games, however, the actual gameplay is in a smooth 60 FPS. This game has a very dark and macabre, sort of Southern Gothic umbrella art style. More what I would describe as dark Western. It's a little hard to describe, I guess. The time period this game takes place in is kind of vague, though the character designs and other associated flourishes seem to suggest somewhere between the late 19th century and the early 20th century. There's one character who mentions their memories of being in a war, almost suggesting the trench warfare of World War I. You play a cowboy who's been executed via electric chair. There's a skeleton aristocrat who offers you a deal, a gambling desperado who killed a bunch of guys, and a theater actress who died in a car crash, among other interesting characters. The writing overall is pretty dark, bordering on pessimistic. Every character you encounter makes it clear that success is not guaranteed, and your soul might end up being lost to limbo, likely to join the cast of characters serving as gatekeepers to resurrection. The old man who you first meet has played this game with many others, and some of them are not friends of his. Your player character is also not a nice person in general. You have dialogue options when conversing with these characters, and you can do things like blow past conversations completely, claim you were framed for the crime that got you executed, or say that you had no regrets for whatever you did. I'm not sure if the dialogue options affect the story or overall progression. Maybe they don't, for reasons I'll get into in a while. But suffice to say, you can be conciliatory and cordial, or you can just be an abrasive asshole. It's your choice. Once you defeat a character at the dice game, you can leave their abode, which is an entire lovingly rendered screen with some clickable elements, the most important of which is the exit itself. I like this. It makes the game feel somewhat immersive in that 90s CD-ROM point-and-click game kind of way. The rest of the art is pretty striking. The actual cards, dice, and items you play with seem to be higher resolution and higher detail than the backgrounds. That is a bit weird, maybe a bit inconsistent, but I don't mind it too much. And there is some interesting stuff here. How about a minimalist die that's made of meteorite? Or one that's solid gold with encrusted gems of numbers? Do you want a grub to buff one of your cards? Or maybe a human tongue preserved in a jar? Take the Devil's Dozen card, or try your hand at the Pyramid. There's also a digital art book available for the game, and the art is pretty nice. The soundtrack is pretty interesting, I'd say. It flips between ambient dread, chill vibes, a sort of cold wave electronica thing, and the sort of world music slush wave. There's a pretty large variety of instruments and sounds here. Now, the actual sound design for the gameplay elements does feel a bit generic. It's almost like the UI sounds and such were plucked from Florophonic or Pixabay. Now, I would like to say that there's nothing wrong with using stock sounds like this, and I think it does still sound kind of unique compared to other games in general. But I have personally played a bunch of number go-up games like this, and, well, this certainly is a number go-up game from the sound design. The one genuine complaint I have is that the Banjo-Kazooie style sounds for characters talking can be a tiny bit grating at times. There is one last thing I should mention for the presentation. You might have noticed the noise of black pixels and flickering lines in my gameplay footage. I do not know if this is on purpose, if this is a glitch with the game, or if my GPU is just on the fritz. It doesn't seem to show up during the conversation scenes or the world map. It's only in the in-game shop and the game board. I played with both Chromatic Aberration and Dithering enabled, then I played with both of those disabled, and it didn't seem to make a difference. This is possibly a me issue. I did make the mistake of allowing Windows 11 to update here and there. Since then, I have been having a minor technical issue in general that would take me slightly too long to explain here. Just know that I'm sorry it looks this way. I'm sorry if it's unpleasant for you to watch, and hopefully you won't experience it if you play it for yourself. So, what's the actual gameplay like? If you've played Balatro or any other game in the same vein, you'll have a pretty good idea of what to expect from BONEREADER. Every character or stage has 4 rounds to beat. The 4th and final round has a special omen that makes it extra difficult, kinda like the bosses in Balatro. By default, you have 4 turns to beat a round. At the start of each turn, you roll your dice automatically. You have to then select from the dice you rolled, building a combination that lets you play one of the cards in your hand for points. Build combos, play cards, try to meet the score goal before you run out of tries. You have a number of rerolls, which refresh each turn, making this different from Balatro's discards. And you'll need them too, because the dice rolls are very much, well, dice rolls. Selecting your dice locks them, and any dice you don't select will get re-rolled. This is useful for trying to build a combo to satisfy a specific card, but you're still at the whims of random chance, and you simply might not get to play the card you want to in a given turn. In addition, at specific intervals, a random effect gets applied to a random card in your hand. Some effects are purely beneficial, others come with a cost, and others are just pure curses. It's that second category that I feel screws you over the most, however. For example, there's a card called the Hunger that scores when you play only ones. However, there's a card effect that increases points when evens are played, and reduces them when odds are played. You can probably see how this makes the card unplayable, and you can have zero control over this, and this is just one example. Well, okay, you have a bit more than zero control. Before the start of each round of each stage, you go into the shop where you can buy dice, cards, and items. Of the consumable items you can buy, some apply blessings to random cards in your hand, while one removes all curses from all your cards. However, at the start, you can only pick from 3 options in the shop, and it costs money to unlock more options. The shop has a reroll, but it seems like you can only use it when you haven't yet bought anything. There is no restocking if you have cash to burn. I personally found that the shop was often a massive crapshoot, pun not intended. Either there would be nothing worth buying, or I'd buy something and it wouldn't help me, or I would buy something and it would just end up sabotaging me. The consumable items are nice, but you can only hold one, they're one-time use, and I feel like they only help so much. And that's if you find something worth using. And even then, if you forget to use them, well, they disappear after that round. Crafting a build in this game seems like it's a real challenge. And speaking of build crafting, the shop phase is also where you select the dice you'll use for the round. You can hold up to 12 dice in your inventory, and up to 12 cards in your deck. You can normally only take up to 5 dice in a round though, so picking your dice loadout can potentially make or break a round depending on your deck build. You gain XP from winning rounds, and when you get enough XP to level up, you get to do the classic roguelite thing where you pick from 3 passive upgrades. In this case, they're called tattoos, and they do the sort of stuff you might expect. You can get an extra reroll in each turn, take an extra die into a round, level up all your cards, or get a multiplier on your final turn, among other effects. Sometimes you can get other tattoos from events and such, For example, the skeletal baron Esteban will offer you a deal to help you both escape the afterlife. His special tattoo halves your points on each of your turns besides the last, where you get a 3 times the multiplier instead. Maybe I should have just challenged him straight up instead, though. I think I got scammed. In terms of the dice you can use, there's a wide and interesting variety. Most are the classic D6 you might expect, with some that land on specific numbers more often. There are some that give more points if they land on a specific number. There are ones with atypical number layouts, like one that's all evens and one that's all odds, or one that's the Fibonacci sequence. Some land on numbers way higher than 6. There's 2 D4s, a D8, a D10, a D12, a D20, and there's also a D6 that has mostly 1s and one 100. Yes, I said that right. The cards represent whatever the dice equivalent of poker hands are. Look, I'm not a gambler, I don't know these things. Some cards just require a pair, or 2 pairs. One requires a pair and a trio. Some require dice with ascending numbers in sequence, or all dice of the same number, or all dice of a specific number. There's a couple of cards that require the dice to reach a specific sum, and there's one card you can play if you have literally no other combo to play and just want some points. Some cards practically require specific dice to be usable at all. Shoutouts to the Serio, which seems to require the aforementioned D6 that can roll 100 in rare instances. Cards can also level up, seemingly from being played in rounds. They also have rarities, which seems to influence their base point value. Now, I played the story mode with the balanced deck, which I figured would be the safe normal option. I wonder though if I should have picked one of the other preset decks. Cards in the balanced deck, like the Ladder or the Rat King, didn't get a lot of opportunity to be used throughout my playthrough, while cards like Devil's Dozen or the Whip were a bit easier to play, if somewhat less rewarding. With all the random stuff that goes on, it can be hard to use the cards that demand 5 dice to play. Selecting dice to lock them does help, but you can still burn through all your rerolls in a turn and not get the combo you want or need. While I haven't personally played Balatro, I've watched enough of it that it sure seems like that game lets you engineer a strategy more easily than this game does. So, what happens when you don't meet the goal? Well, obviously you lose, but it's what happens after you lose where things get weird. I don't know if this is just a thing for the review copy I had, but getting game over just lets you continue from the start of the round you lost. I think this is both good and bad. It's bad because I started running into scenarios where I found it difficult to progress, thanks to a combination of unfavorable luck and an unoptimized build. I could sometimes keep going thanks to random luck, but the saloon was where I found my progress starting to slow real bad. Nothing seemed to work out for me most of the time. However, at the same time, I can't fathom having to start the campaign all over again just because I find myself facing a bit of a difficulty wall. And this game does seem like it wants you to keep going. You are not immediately given the option to just go back to the main menu. You have to click the game over text, and you have to continue. You have to manually hit escape to go back to the main menu. Maybe this will change in the final release though, and getting a game over will give you the option to just go back to the main menu. Maybe they'll implement lives or a limited continue system. As it is from what I saw, your only choices are to keep grinding away at your potentially unoptimized path, or just start all over from scratch. Maybe going back to some previous checkpoints or having some sort of rewind would help. And this weirdness extends to the other game mode, which is Casino Mode, which is the equivalent of the sort of endless mode that's default in other roguelike deck builders. I felt like the Casino Mode flowed a lot more quickly, though maybe that's just because I picked the deck that emphasizes rolling 1s and 13s, and I immediately started out one-turning the rounds. By stage 2, however, I ended up in a similar position as my story mode save, where I either fell frustratingly short of the goal and got game overed a lot, or I smashed it on the final turn with some excess, and I didn't even have Mr. Bones' wild tattoo to both hurt and help me. I think Casino Mode is probably going to be the real meat of the game for some players. It's pick up and go compared to the story mode, and it's just about what you'd expect for a game like this. However, it also does the checkpoint thing like the story mode, and I also don't know if this is truly on purpose. I feel like the Casino Mode should be the one mode where if you lose, then you lose, and you have to start all over again from the main menu. As far as the overall core gameplay goes, though, I think the main tension with this, like with other Balatro-likes, is learning how to live with the consequences of your choices, even if your choices don't seem that meaningful in the face of pure chaos. You can manipulate some things in your favor, but in the end, the dice will get you. That sure seems to be a theme within the writing of the game, from the character conversations to the lore descriptions of the various dice. Consequence is inevitable. There's always a price to be paid, and it's all one big game that's rigged against you. Sometimes you just run out of chances, and that's it for you. That's probably why the ability to just continue from a checkpoint weirds me out like it does. I think this game could get away with losing being a more final thing. But at the same time, this is a roguelike-esque game with an actual story campaign, and you probably don't want your players to slog through multiple conversation scenes over and over just because they bought the wiki up in the store, but didn't have the dice to properly synergize with it. This is also why I'm not certain if the dialogue options actually affect the future like they would in other choice-based games, especially because you could redo a conversation every time you have to restart a section, and you can just pick the shut up and just play option to speed things up. It would be kind of awkward if progression in the story mode was affected by you skipping the deeper conversations with the characters just because you had to redo a round or two and you were a little impatient. Maybe that doesn't matter, and this is all just pointless speculation on my part. The conversations could be purely optional, but I would personally say that they're worth exploring and exhausting. Even though the developers seem to be Eastern European, the writing is not that bad, and it's not too obviously ESL. There's some real narrative meat here. Now, I don't think they'd implement my suggestions, but if I had to offer any, I'd suggest some of the following. Maybe if you game over in the campaign mode, you do have to start all over. But like some roguelikes I have played, you can send over some stuff to the next run. Like maybe building a death deck with a few of the dice and cards you accumulated in your last run carrying over. Characters you've already fought will recognize you as coming back somehow, and while you have to fight them again, maybe they'll be slightly easier or faster to beat. Not to mention they could have newer, possibly shorter dialogue since you've already met them. In terms of real feedback though, there are some things I would like to point out. Besides the issues I've mentioned before, one annoying thing is that cards in your deck seem to be sorted inconsistently every time you view your deck in the shop. This tripped me up once when I went to sell one card and I sold the wrong one instead. That could probably stand to be fixed. Another annoyance is that the consumable items you can buy aren't retained between rounds. This could be a deliberate design choice, but it makes it hard to justify a purchase that could potentially save a round if it's use it or lose it. Some of the items are just straight up better in more situations than some of the other items, such as the lighter that reduces the score requirement. It's hard to justify the grub that applies the diamond buff when it can buff a card that I won't be able to use, versus just straight up making the round easier. Or maybe I won't roll enough 6s to justify the item that gives me more points for every 6 I have. Or maybe I'll just straight up misuse the insect inside of the amber. The item that removes curses from cards is pretty damn powerful compared to the items that buff random cards, I'll say. Overall, though, the game's not bad as it is now, and it is refreshing to play a number go up game like this and have an actual objective to work towards that isn't just unlocking more stuff. It's an eye-catching game that I think really stands out from the crowd. You might quickly find the game or yourself running out of steam after just a couple of hours, but there's real potential here, I think. If you want that kind of 2000s budget PC game vibe with modern gameplay, it's hard to go wrong with BONEREADER. Thank you for watching. I'll catch you all at the mall another time.